Austin, Texas, Mexico City, Unveilment, capital of the world. This topic opens a new chapter in the book. There's no point in going over the major points in the work. I'm truly like a hedgehog which only knows one important thing, as distinct from the fox, good and many details. Genesis 1:1a Aleph, therefore PaRaDiSe. The thing is that the need is still out there. We went from a worldly, chronically broken one to one gravely broken down. We're living times of the coronavirus pandemic, which causes the COVID-19 shutdown condition. The Enlightenment project was sailing fine till it hit the iceberg. It held its ground as USA Constitution 1789 till PaRaDiSe Genesis 1:1a Aleph came and debunked it. The problem is out there, and the solution is in here. What role I'll play in all this remains to be seen. The problem has a belly button. I live here and now. I'm Ricardo, and the times now are those of the calendar year 2020, 21st century, third millennium. The here is Austin, Texas, the place I call home, though I yearn Mexico City, where I come from of late. The world is up against the ropes and doesn't know the ropes either. I must now move on from theory to practice. I got a call, took down notes, now must deliver the message and start the migration from bondage crossing the sea of impediments. Let me finish where I started. Then the emphasis was on the problem, now the action is on the solution. Though things have gone from bad to worse, overall is the underlying chronic crises turning grave due to COVID-19 crashing our lives and our livelihoods. Our proposal is based on the primeval Kabbalah reception of PaRaDiSe, consisting of triad parts PRD, consisting of Deraj discover, Remez remit, plain Peshat of the one whole sought secret. Our proposal is the universal, quote, enthusiast in following PaRaDiSe Genesis 1:1a Aleph as sought secret S of one whole. Of the whole S, nothing can be said other than recognizing it, if it, quote, is, and likewise not recognizing it if it, quote, is not. However, what we can delve on are with the pieces of the puzzle by way of the triad parts PRD and further down the line with the triad of triads for details. But it is the characteristics of the, quote, enthusiast universal that is the essence. Let's now flesh out by way of the triad of triads as in triad parts PRD /one whole S. On this occasion, we'll make the connection of the one whole S with the principal triad PRD by way of the middle factor Remez remit, whereas previously we were making contact by way of the Deraj discover, the topmost factor. The idea is to land on the mental triad R and once smack in the middle of the bridge, make the projections both upward to the spiritual triad D as well as downward to the physical triad P. This approach is in following with our, quote, abductive procedure of common sense hermeneutics in preference to the more thorough inductive and deductive methods of science and philosophy, respectively. For purposes of comparison, we will mention that we're contrasting it by placing our proposal in the numerator in bold script and the demoted in the denominator in regular font. We're hanging by the coattails of the Enlightenment project insofar as our U.S. Constitution is fashioned out of, quote, dualism, as, quote, reason was understood back in the 18th century. Suddenly, courtesy of coronavirus, all its hidden maladies have surfaced. Fortunately, PaRaDiSe Genesis 1:1a Aleph had previously debunked it. The drawback was that the, quote, solution had no corresponding, quote, problem to address. That is, until the COVID-19 pandemic crashed our lives and livelihoods, leaving no room for doubt that we had a major problem on our hands. The challenge now is to impress on the healthy and wealthy that PaRaDiSe Genesis 1:1a Aleph is panacea. Perhaps due to my advanced youth, but experience has taught me to base my claims on Mother Rock. If you start peeling away the layers of an onion, starting with our broken modernity, this will undoubtedly take you to classical Greek antiquity of Athenian philosophy and pre-Socratic thought. Not fearing being fired, I threw away the shackles of the mind and bored through the false foundations to uncover a whole treasure of knowledge in pre-antiquity. But not in Europe, in Asia, this time just crossing the Mediterranean Sea. namely in the archaic period of the Middle East. The problem is that all civilization is contaminated by dualism, including the contemporary version of the Kabbalah reception as key to understanding the Bible and our world through it as blueprints of creation. What I did, besides going to the very beginning of things in the Genesis creation story, was to go behind the scenes, from the field of creation to the source of the Creator. This I achieved by including creation creator by way of Genesis 1:1a Aleph, that is, the first word of creation and the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet of the Creator, namely Bereshit in beginning of and Aleph A, respectively. I intuitively compare the need of humanity per se with sleeping or recharging with a good night's sleep. And much to my surprise, this reconnecting via sleep with our Creator seems to work just as well in language, all proportions kept. I stretched out my hand out of bounds to pull in the ball to the field of play, so to speak, in football jargon. So then, this Genesis 1-way Aleph is Mother Rock on which to base our social edifice. Nothing short of this will do, for without it, sooner than later, it turns into a Tower of Babel of speaking nonsense and the reign of chaos, much like what we're ailing through today. The foundational inquiry is, who are we? It's important to know who we are if we're ever to realize our potential. The answer to who we are is in Genesis 1:26-27. The Creator somehow made, quote, us participants in our own, quote, making, then went ahead by itself and, quote, created us by way of the language linkage. This is mentioned on the top left and right sides of the visual. If we now do our homework, it figures out that, quote, GD is in us. Thus, we use the word, quote, enthusiasm, meaning, quote, having GD in us. This established our proposal of a human being within our PaRaDiSism project of humanity as, quote, enthusiasm universal. Today's ideal person is a, quote, hollow core individual, some zero fullness in emptiness. This is tagged with our being sought secret as S as heading. The rest is just downhill race once we've nailed down the first turn in the labyrinth. The solution of, quote, deity I place in the numerator and the problem of, quote, idolatry I place on the denominator. Idol worship is a tricky business. It surprises where you least expect it, like with meditation. Within our nomenclature, underneath the heading comes the main triad of parts PRD, and surrounding it the auxiliary triad of triads of P, R, and D. In the case of the auxiliary triad P, these are labeled PP, RP, and DP, and similarly with the remaining R and D auxiliary ones. Of being sought secret as, nothing can be said other than believe it or not. However, what can be said is concerning becoming parts PRD, which are defined as the Raj discover, remit, remit, and Peshat plane. Next, the place to continue is with the triad, main triad PRD as Genesis 1:1a Aleph in the place of the Raj discover, followed by PaRaDiSe in the place of remit, remit, and finally with a reversal constitution in the place of Peshat plane. This means that on our explanation and understanding of things, the spiritual is guided by Genesis 1-way Aleph, the mental by PaRaDiSe, and the physical by the reversal constitution. Let's start this time with the middle section of the auxiliary triad remit remit corresponding to the mental R. This serves the purpose of sandwiching the linguistic R between the celestial D and the terrestrial P. Now I place in the numerator the solution of, quote, PaRaDiSe in bold font, and in the denominator the problem of, quote, Messiah Mashiach in plain script. In the remit remit auxiliary triad, this corresponds to the diagonal RR. Continuing the triad will be the vertical DR. Likewise, with our proposed solution in the numerator, quote, holism, and the problem today, since yesterday actually, quote, dualism in the denominator. Similarly, with the horizontal PD, likewise with our proposed, quote, triad science in the numerator, and, quote, science religion divide in the denominator. We need to be mindful of the role of anachronism in triad science. This bias stems from highlighting modern advances of the Newtonian, quote, mathematical principles of natural philosophy, physics, all the while ignoring the comparable archaic of Mosaic, quote, number principles in cultural philosophy. The role that this has played in the development of physics and chemistry and biology needs no elaboration. But perhaps we need reminding that letters and numbers go hand in hand in the holy language of Hebrew. Once achieving fusing science and religion by stepping on the shoulder of the former and grabbing onto the soul of the latter during the remainder of the 21st century, we'll be well on our way to enjoying a wonderful world of knowledge. Let's now continue with the derived discover auxiliary triad corresponding to the spiritual D. We now flesh out the meaning of D into PD, RD, and DD. As amply mentioned in the topics already covered, my main claim is that only the Torah teaching is revelation to Moses at Mount Sinai. I endorse the strict sense Torah Bible over the Latu sense Tanakh Bible. But not only that, I go fully to the bottom of the heap. From the 5 books, I narrow it down to Genesis, and in this to the first chapter, and in this to the very first word Bereshit, in beginning of, and finally added the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, A. This gives me, quote, Genesis 1:1a Aleph as the main idea, RD, in the celestial sphere, same which I place in the numerator, and with, quote, no principle in the denominator, as there doesn't seem to be any theory out there with such a primeval beginning principle as the one herein proposed. Continuing with the upper imaginary side, I populated with, quote, Torah Bible in DD in the numerator and with Tanakh Bible in the denominator, as this seems to be current canonical belief. Finishing this triad with, quote, Tanakh Bible in the numerator and not clear to me in the denominator as PD. Let's now wrap up with the Peshat plane triad corresponding to the physical P. This is the most political of the lot. Smack in the main part is placed in the numerator, the, quote, I'm a reversal constitution, with the intent of replacing the outdated, quote, Enlightenment USA Constitution 1789 as RP. Once this central piece is in place, next would follow populating the upper with the, quote, People's Universal Institute of Rights and Powers in the numerator, with today's quote, People's Fiction of Rights and Powers in the denominator as DP. Finally, now filling in the lower part of our proposal of a, quote, of a limited, quote, government of legislative and executive powers only in the numerator, all the while with our broken system today of a, quote, government of legislative, executive, and judicial, all powers in the denominator as PP. So much then for explaining the ins and outs of the PaRaDiSism project proposal. In closing, I would like to connect with where it all started. Kind of like my own personal story. Picked up the call and gave up making infant incubators to make incubators for the human spirit instead. The charge of these dipole cities, Austin, Texas, Mexico City, is to inaugurate era of unveilment. Note that reveal is the same as unveil. Unveil as lifting the veil. Unveilment thus hangs from the coattails of revelation. To unveil means to lift the veil, whereas enlighten means to supply light. Enlightenment was revival of classical antiquity. Unveilment will be the revival of the biblical archaic. Quote, Revelation came first at Genesis 1:1a Aleph as creation creator. Quote, light came later in Genesis 1:3. Previous is backstage theater of space-time. Then first you lift the curtain, then you shine light on the stage, populate, and then start the show. Revelation is from the source, whereas unveilement is from the field. Let's be in our hearts and deeds like a drop in the ocean, but unlike it, more like a musical notes spreading out, ever getting louder and louder and stronger in the ether of space-time in a restaging of the Big Bang. In all fairness, Austin, Mexico City, let's hang together like a dipole magnetic moment and play the Musica Universalis of the harmony of the spheres, of the song of peace and love to all the 4 corners of the world. Well, that's all, people. Yours truly, Rick, you Charo Anusim, GD Bless, Austin, Texas, capital of the world.